We're talking with Taylor Bradford of the Gloucester Daily Times once again about what she has been working on this week. How you doing, Taylor?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Great. Okay, so right off the top, something about the MBTA and idling trains.
Yeah, so over by the West Gloucester train station, the residents over there have been hearing a lot of noise morning, noon, and night, and they have raised up their own noise to kind of raise awareness for what's been going on. You guys all know the Gloucester Drawbridge replacement project that's been going on, and that has continued to go on until 2022. Is because of that, and because they had to close down both tracks and create a shuttle service, the trains obviously cannot cross over these bridges that are being worked on. And so those trains are now being positioned in other places in order to be able to turn back southbound. Now, the problem is that the MBTA is not able to turn those off. And so what that means is that trains are idling and making a lot of noises. And so they've been positioned a couple different places here on Cape Ann to idle while they wait to return southbound. But the problem is that they make a lot of noise, and the residents have seen that this has gotten even worse as time has gone on. And so the MBTA gave a presentation on Tuesday night's city council meeting to ensure residents that they are indeed going to be moving the trains to a location that will hopefully be less noisy for them, and be able to kind of allow them to have their peace and quiet in the neighborhoods. So they are going to be having engine hold signs installed directly behind the XP Power Company building at 11 Condolin Road in the Cape Ann Industrial Park. And that's where trains will that have a longer dwell time are going to be required to be. And they're going to be having managers from Keolis Commuter Service, which helps manage the MBTA. They're going to have managers go and be there to ensure that trains do in fact stay and idle in that location, as opposed to idling at the West Gloucester train station or other places that might disturb the residents. I had an opportunity to actually go down to meet up with a few of the residents socially distanced, and we talked a lot about how they understand and they know that when they bought their houses that they were moving next to a train station. So they knew they're going to deal with some noises, but the bells and the whistles and the idling of these trains in particular, they've lost sleep. That now, because they're all working remotely because of COVID pandemic, it's been really hard for both themselves and their children who are doing online remote learning to be able to do their jobs well and effectively due to this. So Bruce Tarr and his office have been working with the MBTA and the residents to continue that conversation in the hopes of making things a little bit quieter, as this project will continue for a couple more years.
That's great. And Heather will be speaking with Bruce in just a little later on today. Also, Taylor, you have an update on the East Gloucester and Veterans Memorial School consolidation.
Yes, so as you all know that, the final construction project cost number was totaled to $66.7 million. And so that is for the construction of the new combined school that, again, the debt exclusion vote in November will dictate whether or not that goes through. Voters will have the chance to see that on the ballot. But there were some ancillary costs that the city council approved in a loan authorization on Tuesday night for $4.2 million. And so what those ancillary costs are is $1.5 million to $2 million for the relocation of the ball field that is currently located at Matos Field, the $1 million to cover the cost of renting swing space for Veterans Memorial students and teachers, and then the demolition of that school, demolition of the East Gloucester building as they work to make that a green space. So that'll be about $1.2 million for that demolition over at East Gloucester Elementary School. So that, right, again, totals to $4.2 million. And again, that is separate from the $66.7 million that the project approved by MSBA will be. So that was approved this past Tuesday. The full video of the conversation can be found on the city's website, and then details in our article as well, which can be found in print, but also online on our website.
Very good. And there is a new Indian restaurant on Duncan Street in downtown Gloucester.
Yeah, so if you guys are looking at to spice up your palates here in Gloucester, have no fear because Taj is here. The Serenity Restaurant Group has officially opened their Indian restaurant, the first one here in Gloucester, called Taj, and they have a quite extensive menu, and they're actually sharing this space with other people as well. So while by day, the 3 Duncan Street is a coffee shop, Breakwater Roasters, also owned by the Serenity Restaurant Group. At 4, that closes at 2. At 4 o'clock, they have a 2-hour window. At 4 o'clock, Indian food will now be served over at the 3 Duncan Street, neighbors to Backyard Growers. And I had a chance to go down, talk to the chef, try a little bit of their food. And it's definitely great for the Indian cuisine novices out there, because it definitely has a little bit less spice than some of your traditional. They're calling it a creative spin on some of the traditional things that we might think to be Indian cuisine. So they have quite the menu. The scenery doesn't really change between the coffee shop and the Indian restaurant, but they've got quite the extensive menu. Cocktail list that is very specific to Indian culture and trying to really include those spices that they might use for some of their cuisine as well. So they have quite the menu. And then their chef, who was going to be there for the opening, Graham Gilchrist, won the Food Network's Chopped. So when you guys go to visit, you can see him working and creating out some really new things for the menus here in Gloucester.
Great work as always, Taylor. We'll check in with you next week.
Thanks. Have a great weekend, guys.
Woods, how you doing, Erika?
Hey there, Corey. I'm doing great. There's a lot of stuff happening, as usual. I mean,
yeah. You mentioned
like there's always stuff happening.
I know it's a busy time of year, and especially now that school is back in session, sports is happening.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, I mean, it was really a short time ago, sports were approved by the school committee, and lo and behold, they started this week. This week was the preseason. So it was tryouts, but we didn't have tryouts in the MERSD world. Middle and high school sports did not go through tryouts. They literally, if you want to show up, you're going to get on a sport. No football, as everybody knows, right? We're going to do football in the spring, but everyone's back, and it really was really fantastic to see the soccer and cross country, and the girls and boys out there doing their thing. Was really fantastic.
Yeah, I imagine the students are like out of their minds just being able to run around and play and congregate again, compete.
Yeah, exactly. And actually the school season with interscholastic games starts next week. So it's going to be really fast, but you're right. They're so happy to be there. I don't know remember we talked about this a couple of weeks ago that it wasn't all parents, but the community circulated around a petition signed by nearly 200 people saying they want sports back. It's healthier to be engaged with sports than to withhold that activity, particularly as the days get shorter and it gets darker, and it just is really hard with kids not moving around with anxiety and depression, and that's the worst of it. So this is really, really fantastic. Kids are really happy.
Great to point out. And also you have something cool in there about the Sleeper McCann.
Yeah, over the summer, there are the museums, most museums have closed for COVID, right? I mean, we know that. But there were some museums that started, museum groups that started to kind of look and assess their properties and see if they were able to do a limited kind of run. Sleeper McCann was one of them. They're owned by they're managed and run by Historic New England. They have 37 properties around New England. But a small portion of them, and the Sleeper McCann house was one of them, was allowed to be open for limited views. And that means under 4 people. It's notable that Cogswell's Grant in Essex, which is also owned by Historic New England, was not one of them that was appropriate or deemed appropriate. So you can go and walk on the property, but you cannot go to the actual facility at Cogswell's Grant. So the Sleeper McCann house is amazing. Henry Davis Sleeper. I was really unfamiliar with it. It's a total gem and a discovery. And I won't bore you with the details, but he was a very, very unconventional interior decorator. He was a celebrity, and he was a national celebrity. He was in a national ad campaign for a coffee company in the 1930s that talked about, permanent bachelors, which I think was code for being gay, to be honest with you. And he was sort of seen and as one of them, and he was along with, Gary Cooper and all these other people. He had very unconventional ways of approaching design. Things like, it's a 40-room property, but no hallways because he didn't like them. He would put things like priceless art next to something he found with his mother at a flea market. Those things are all very modern today, but back in the early 1900s, it was unheard of, very unconventional. His influence cannot be underestimated. Martha Stewart, Ralph Lauren, they all have come to this museum to get inspiration. And if you just go, it's amazing. So really, that's the Sleeper McCann House. But the real story is that these are these local wonders that are sort of right now available. And they're wonders because you can go and experience these things as if you're really wealthy and you close down the whole museum and you got to see it with just a couple of friends.
Yeah, it's built-in VIP status. I like that.
Exactly. I mean, the Sleeper McCann House, the normal tours are 4 people and under, which is nothing. It's a 45-minute tour. You can sign up. It's easy to get in. But they also had something called their Nooks and Crannies tour, which is a deeper experience anyway. They used to do it before COVID. They continued it and adjusted a little bit. But it's literally like you have the museum right to yourself. So we met with Martha Van Couvering is the property manager. She's fantastic. And so we did a great story. And it's perfectly timed because they were open midsummer to now, right? Now, things like the Cape Ann Museum, I know they were on with you, Oliver Barker, they're open up this coming week to the general public for limited tours. So just the same kind of thing. So I'm going to do that next week, and I'm thinking it's going to be great.
Yeah, it will be. And lastly, Erika, we want to touch upon next week's Essex Town Meeting.
Yeah, Essex has a fall town meeting. Manchester does not have its fall town meeting, and Manchester typically doesn't have a fall town meeting. It's unusual if it does. Essex had a lot of business, 17, article warrant, which is pretty healthy warrant. It's going to be a week from Saturday. It's going to be outside. It was supposed to be later in the month, but they moved it back because they want to have it outside. And I don't know if you remember, Essex Elementary School, they had the outdoor town meeting in June. It went great.
Yep.
It went off without a hitch. But there are 2 warrants of note, and one of them has to do with cannabis. It's funny, Essex is, it's interesting to watch them. They've been incrementally kind of almost tying down these threads around the cannabis retailing that is now going to happen in Essex. And this latest round is they're going to, I hope I get this right. They're going to vote to grant 0 licenses, which is backing into it, interestingly, but I'm sure there's a reason. 0 licenses for on-premises consumption of cannabis. So I was thinking, when I was talking to Pam, that this was more like a cigar bar. Oh, we don't want to have a cigar bar for smoking dope.
It's the brownie bar.
Exactly. Actually, that's exactly what she said. She said, no, don't think of smoking. That's old fashioned. There are a lot of establishments like in Colorado and out west where literally restaurants, the theme is cannabis infused foods. And that's what they're kind of targeting for that. So I guess I'm old fashioned.
Yeah, well, yeah, me too then.
I didn't go right to the brownies. Or in this case, it's like langoustine, like a lobster meal, infused with dope butter.
Well, great stuff as always. Let's take a deeper dive into that town meeting next week when we chat with you again.
I think we should, because the other article is interesting, is the cell phone towers, and we should really talk about that because you see signs everywhere in Essex about cell phone towers. And the reason we shouldn't talk about it now is I'm not sure what's going to happen on town meeting floor regarding that article.
Okay, we'll stay tuned and check in with you this time next week.
Awesome. Great to see you, Corey.
Good seeing you. All right, back once again with John Penaloza of Rockport Stuff. Now, last week he talked about a poll he posted regarding term limits for Rockport selectmen. How you doing, John?
Good. How are you guys?
Great. All right, so what were the results?
7 days into it, the results are 3-1 in favor of term limits, which is kind of amazing because that's a pretty revolutionary step, and it's something that people have kind of talked about in the background and everything, but it seemed a little bit out there. But at least on Rockport Stuff, it's 92 votes in favor and 35 votes against. So that's a clear majority, and if that reflects some of the wider voting population, the people that show up to town meeting, that could happen at some point. Now we just have to get a declaration that this whole pandemic thing is over, and then we can move forward.
Right.
So John, I do follow Rockport Stuff, and I follow that thread pretty carefully. Yep. And there are arguments that say it's against the state constitution to have these term limits.
Yes, I've heard that too. And in the past, it's been kind of discarded out of hand with that argument. But then I also did some research, and apparently there's at least 2 towns that have term limits already established. And I'm trying to remember exactly which ones they are. Oh yeah, Methuen and Southbridge apparently already have term limits in place for their select boards. And Dedham was considering voting on it in the past few years, or had put it to a vote.
Right.
So I don't think it's impossible, you know.
So could you just lay out the groundwork? So there are no term limits right now for Rockport selectmen, is that right?
That's right. There've never been term limits for Rockport selectmen.
Or according to the state constitution, there can't be, but we don't know about that. But so that's how the state constitution, we think, reads. Nonetheless, this citizen's petition is proposing what?
The citizen's petition, if you guys want, I can read it for you. It's pretty quick.
Sure.
No person elected to serve as selectman may serve more than 3 consecutive terms of office or 9 consecutive years, whichever is greater. If a lapse in service of at least 2 years occurs between any previous term and the term for which the election is sought, the person may be elected to serve as selectman for a 4th non-consecutive term or 12 non-consecutive years in the aggregate. So basically, you know, three terms at the same time, and then it can be interrupted. The person is not selectman and then can be voted again, but for no more than 12 years total.
Okay. And is the compensation for Rockport selectmen still there? We give them health care?
Yeah, generally speaking, it's been, we give them health care, and you know, these people volunteer a lot of their time, and thank goodness that as such a small town, we have, you know, professional people, or we have well-prepared people who do their best on the board, right? And so for me, I agree with that argument, but the problem becomes when there's too much, incumbency becomes an obstacle to its own goal, right? To the goal of proper functioning of government. Because after a while, any incumbent becomes too used to the halls of power and the machinery and how to get stuff accomplished, and wants to continue in that, right? Anybody wants to keep things as they are. So if you're a selectman, you want to stay a selectman unless you actually leave the board, right? Which a lot of people have done, which I admire. Like, they come up and they take their turn, and they volunteer, and they provide for the town, but they know it's a turn, right? It's something that it's like almost any civic-minded person would do, especially in a town as small as Rockport, right? It takes a village. Then the problem becomes when people kind of overstay their welcome in a way. And I feel that is the way it goes when people are in for too long. Because yes, there's continuity of government. Yes, there's experience with how the town is run, but those things can become a detriment because you get stuck in your old ways and you don't come up with fresh ideas, and you're not necessarily sensitive to the needs of the electorate at that point. And just the name recognition alone creates barriers for any new people to be able to come in, fresh blood, fresh ideas, and a different take and reacting to the norms of the time.
I wonder, have any of the selectmen weighed in on this? I wonder what their opinions are on whether they want term limits or not.
You know, it's funny, on one of the threads regarding term limits before we put up the post, I remember that Don Campbell actually said he would be in favor of term limits. He said he had no problem with term limits being established. And I think, you know, he's one of the people that's been in there. He has a different kind of point of view than a lot of the selectmen that have been around. And I actually appreciate the fact that he has a little bit of independent thought in that regard. And I think he's in there like the right way. Like, you stay in 2-3 terms, and then it's good for you to bow out and let somebody else take a turn. So I think term limits is actually a way to accomplish a really dynamic form of government, and something that's fresh and has change, you know. I think it would be a benefit for Rockport. Right?
Just be clear with people that this citizen petition is not on the warrant this Saturday. Because
it's not on the warrant this Saturday because it is tabled. All citizens petitions are tabled until the a declaration that the state of emergency is ended by Charlie Baker, according to the board. So it would happen at the first town meeting after that point, where that was what they had approved at the last town meeting.
Right.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for checking in, John. We'll see you next week.
Thanks very much, guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye.